The Simpsons theme is just chaotic. Everything we know about music theory, the common principles that composers use, the Simpsons just take all of that and throw it out the window. And still, it's one of the most recognizable and generally beloved tunes. Most common soundtracks follow a pretty similar approach. They start with the main motif that gets repeated and slightly adjusted throughout the piece. The main motif is usually carried by a single instrument, or is passed between 2 or 3 different ones at max. Harmonically, it establishes a tonal center, which the piece orbits around and usually ends in as well. The Simpsons theme, on the other hand, represents its main motif and then changes it drastically almost immediately. The repetitions are either orchestrated differently, they are supported by a completely different harmony, or the shape of the motif itself is changed quite a lot. The accompaniment supporting the music revolves around a tritone, one of the most dissonant intervals there is. And the harmony is constantly jumping between tonal centers that has absolutely nothing to do with each other. It's like the music cannot decide where to go. It presents one idea, then changes its mind and goes somewhere completely else. In this video we will look closely at 4 main points in which the Simpsons theme just completely derails from the norm. First up, the modes. Even though you might not even know what modes are, you surely do know at least 2 of them. Modes are essentially different types of scales that music utilizes. The 2 mostly used and the ones you 100% know are major and minor, but there are many other different scales. For example, a Lydian mode. When you take your normal major scale and you raise the 4th degree, you get a Lydian scale. This is a very bright sounding mode, but it has a catch. The raised 4th degree now forms a tritone with a tonic, and this very harsh sound is what the Simpsons accompaniment relies on. So the theme is placed within a Lydian mode, and it opens with one of the most dissonant intervals in music. So immediately it sets itself apart from a normal soundtrack. But the Lydian is not the only scale that this piece uses. When the piece transitions between the main motif, it almost always does it by deploying a whole tone scale. This scale has a pretty dreamy, ethereal feel to it. As the name suggests, the notes within it are divided by a whole tone. The same distance between them means that all the notes hold an equal value, and not one of them stands out in particular. It's a pretty smart choice to use this scale for transitions and modulations, because you can basically land on any of the notes within it and continue with the music smoothly. So modes and different unusual scales play a big role in setting this piece apart. But where the music really differs from the rest is in this next point, which is modulations. Modulations simply refer to an act of leaving one tonal center and entering a new one. This is a circle of fifths. We can learn a ton of useful information from this diagram, but for the sake of modulations, all you need to know is that keys that are close to each other share a lot of notes, and the further you go around the circle, the less notes they share. That means that a modulation between a C major and a G major, for example, is much more smoother and seamless than the one between C major and B major. The former is much more common and is usually what most soundtracks do. The latter is what The Simpsons do. The piece begins in C Lydian, and by the end we found ourselves in D flat Lydian, which is almost across the whole circle. So let's see how the music gets there. After the initial C Lydian, we modulate to B Lydian, which, as already said, is a pretty jarring transition. But Danny Elfman pulls it off by changing the Lydian mode into the Lydian dominant in the last bar before the modulation. Lydian dominant has a raised 4th, same as the normal Lydian, but it also has a lowered 7th degree. In case of C Lydian, we flatten the B note into B flat. The B flat then nicely flows into the root note of our new key, B Lydian, because it's just a half step up. We get our main motif in the B Lydian tonality, but we don't stay there for much longer. We are once again modulating, now towards E Lydian. This time the transition is pretty easy, and it's because these 2 keys are next to each other in the circle of fifths. This is the only common modulation that we get in this piece. Right after, we are on a move again. We are returning to the original tonality of C Lydian, which, as you can see from the diagram, is once again a pretty jarring leap. This time we are using the note of E natural as a pivot note. Pivot note is a tone that is shared between 2 different scales and acts as a bridge to cross the distance between them. The music again heads towards B Lydian, same as in the beginning, but this time we make a little detour to E flat Lydian first. It lasts only 2 bars and it kind of eases the transition, as E flat is situated roughly in the middle between a C and a B in the circle of fifths. We eventually get to the B Lydian, and we actually spend some time here. By some time I mean 7 bars, which is still quite a lot considering the rapid pace of modulating in this piece. The B note in B Lydian eventually becomes a leading note, taking us back to the C Lydian. This is a place where we can start to recognize kind of a pattern, as after the C Lydian we move to E flat Lydian again. But the pattern is immediately broken, as the next tonal center isn't that of a B Lydian, but a D flat Lydian. This modulation seems kind of normal as well, since these two keys are pretty close in the circle of fifths. But it's actually the only transition that doesn't do any groundwork to blend these two keys together, so it still comes off as pretty surprising. And D flat is the final tonality, in which the piece finally comes to an end. That was a pretty crazy harmonic journey, wasn't it? But through that explanation you can still see that there is some order in that chaos. Up until now, we've only been talking about things happening sort of in the background. Let's see how these two previous points affect the things that we actually perceive in the music. Let's talk about the main motif of the piece. The first things that we notice about it is, for example, the syncopation. The notes come in between the beats, rather than naturally coming on the beat. This makes the motif pretty clumsy, adding to the chaotic nature of the music. It also makes use of the Lydian raised fourth to a large extent. Majority of songs that use different modes other than major or minor, they utilize the shifted notes in the melody sparsely. They rather have it in the accompanying harmony instead. But the Simpsons theme fully embraces the uniqueness of the sound. Now let's compare the first time that we hear this theme with its first repetition. It is now played in a very low register and it's orchestrated completely differently. The latter half of the motif is also altered. At this point we jump up by a seventh, where previously we only jumped by a second. And the same leap happens at the end of the motif, in contrast to the former where we only stepped up one note. And we have already discussed how this motif is now set up in completely different tonality. That's 5 different changes. Normally, when a soundtrack would repeat its main motif for the first time, it would play it exactly the same or just change 1 or 2 small things. Just another way in which this theme differs and breaks all the established guidelines. The last thing that I would like to mention about this opening theme is the orchestration. Let's firstly look how the main motif is orchestrated. The first time we hear it in a high register, it's played by a flute, harp and a saxophone. The first repetition takes the motif down to trombones, a completely different timbre right off the bat. The next repetition is orchestrated more fully, utilizing a whole string and a wind section. In just 3 repetitions, the music used 3 completely different colors of sound. The other way the orchestration plays into the chaos is in the different textural sounds we get. The aforementioned scale runs used to tie the different adorations of the main motif, for example. Sometimes it's just a plain harp. The other times it's wind instruments like flutes and clarinets, and occasionally a strings, to name a few. You're always getting these seamlessly random textures, different sounds at any point of the music. It once again contrasts a normal composition that have a pretty stable accompaniment that stays the same basically throughout the whole music. Through those 4 points you can clearly see that the soundtrack doesn't have to follow a strict path to become successful. We explain how the Simpsons theme differs in terms of modes, in terms of modulation, in usage of its main motif and in orchestration. Yet all those oddities led to creation of one of the most beloved themes of all time. If you're interested in more movie soundtracks, check out this video. Or if you rather fancy a video game music breakdown, click right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.